There's a reason most people who try to eat healthier quietly give up within a few weeks. And it usually isn't willpower, it's arithmetic. Meal planning, grocery lists, prep time, cooking from scratch. Most advice about healthy eating assumes you have an extra hour a day that doesn't actually exist. Here's what researchers have noticed instead. People who eat well long term usually aren't following complicated plans. They're eating the same small handful of foods over and over because there's nothing left to decide. And here's the part nobody expects. A few of these foods actually get better once they're canned, frozen, or processed a certain way. Not worse, better. 10 foods. None of them require a recipe. A couple of them might change how you think about convenience altogether. If you like the actual research behind food advice instead of vague wellness tips, that's exactly what this channel digs into. Let's start with the one probably already sitting in your fridge. Number one, Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt gets treated like a health food almost by default, the same way spinach or oatmeal does. Something you're supposed to eat without really asking why. The why is worth a second look. The process itself is simple. Regular yogurt gets strained to remove the liquid whey, sometimes three separate times. What's left behind is thicker, tangier, and considerably more concentrated in protein, roughly 9 to 10% by weight, compared to standard yogurt. That's not a small difference. A typical serving delivers meaningfully more protein than the same amount of regular yogurt, without needing a shake, a powder, or a trip down the supplement aisle. Here's where it gets more interesting than a protein number. Yogurt is fermented using live bacterial cultures, and those cultures are what nutritionists mean when they talk about probiotics, live microorganisms linked to supporting gut health. Harvard School of Public Health notes that yogurt typically needs at least 1 million live cultures per serving to earn a live and active cultures seal. And this is the part worth knowing before you assume every tub on the shelf is equal. Some manufacturers heat treat yogurt after fermentation to extend its shelf life, and that heat kills off nearly all the live bacteria in the process. The yogurt still tastes the same. It's still technically yogurt. It just isn't doing the probiotic work anymore. So the honest instruction isn't Greek yogurt has probiotics. It's check the label for that live culture seal because straining out the whey doesn't strip the benefit, but heating the yogurt afterward can. Researchers studying protein-rich dairy have also found it tends to support satiety, that feeling of fullness that keeps you from raiding the pantry an hour later, largely because protein slows digestion more than carbohydrates do. Not a miracle mechanism, just useful, ordinary biology. So, Greek yogurt earns its reputation. Mostly. Just not automatically, and not from every carton. Number two, lentils. If Greek yogurt earns its reputation with a caveat, lentils earn theirs almost without one. And the reason comes down to something surprisingly practical. Most legumes need soaking, sometimes overnight, before they're even ready to cook, and even after that, an hour or more on the stove. Lentils skip nearly all of it. No hard outer shell to soften, no soaking required, dry to fully cooked in well under 30 minutes. Nutritionists sometimes call them the express lane of the legume world, and the comparison holds up. That speed doesn't come at the cost of substance. A cup of cooked lentils delivers close to 18 grams of protein and over 15 grams of fiber, according to nutritional data comparing common legumes, numbers that put lentils ahead of chickpeas and roughly even with black beans, while asking for a fraction of the cooking time either one requires. Here's a detail worth sitting with. Lentils are a legume, which means like most plant proteins, they're not a complete protein on their own, missing enough of one particular amino acid to fully match what your body needs. Pair them with rice, and that gap closes. This isn't a modern nutritional hack. Cultures across the world independently landed on rice and lentil combinations for centuries, long before anyone understood amino acid chemistry, simply because the combination was satisfying and kept people fed. There's also a fiber story here that goes beyond digestion. Research has consistently linked legume-rich diets, lentils included, to better blood sugar regulation, largely because that same fiber slows how quickly the body absorbs the carbohydrates sitting alongside it in a meal. Slower absorption, steadier blood sugar, fewer crashes. Lentils aren't on this list because they're glamorous. They're here because they're one of the rare foods that manage to be fast, cheap, and nutritionally serious all at once without forcing you to pick which one to sacrifice. Number 3, bananas. There's a reason bananas end up in every gym bag, every school lunch, every airport kiosk, and it's not just that they taste good. It's that they're the rare food that requires zero preparation of any kind. No knife, no container, no plan. You peel it standing up. That convenience tends to get dismissed as a lesser kind of health food, something for people who didn't have time to do better. The nutrition doesn't really support that dismissal. A medium banana carries around 400 to 450 milligrams of potassium, a mineral most people don't get enough of, and one that plays a direct role in regulating blood pressure by helping the kidneys manage sodium balance. And this is where the story gets more specific than bananas are good for you. Unripe green bananas contain meaningful amounts of resistant starch, a type of starch the small intestine can't fully break down, which means it behaves more like fiber than sugar once it reaches the gut, feeding beneficial bacteria there instead of spiking blood sugar. As a banana ripens, that resistant starch converts into regular sugar, which is exactly why a green banana tastes starchy and a spotted one tastes sweet. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should. It means the healthiest banana and the sweetest banana are genuinely different bananas, not the same fruit at 2 points on a scale of good and bad, but a real shift in what's actually inside it. If blood sugar stability is the priority, a slightly underripe banana is doing different work than the fully ripe one sitting next to it in the bowl. None of this makes bananas some kind of nutritional secret. Their real value has always been logistical. They travel well, they don't need washing, cutting, or cooking, and they still deliver a genuinely useful nutrient most people are quietly short on. Number 4, berries. Frozen food carries a quiet stigma most people never actually examine. Fresh feels like the version that matters, and frozen feels like the compromise, the thing you settle for when the produce aisle lets you down. With berries specifically, that assumption doesn't hold up, and the reason is almost mechanical. Berries are prized for anthocyanins, the compounds behind their deep red, blue, and purple color, and a class of antioxidant researchers have linked to cardiovascular protection and reduced inflammation. A frozen bag of blueberries is typically harvested at peak ripeness and flash frozen within hours, locking the anthocyanin content in place before it has any real chance to degrade. And here's the part that genuinely surprised the researchers who first looked closely at it. One food scientist studying blueberries frozen for 1, 3, and 5 months found no drop in antioxidant content compared to fresh. If anything, the opposite happened. Freezing forms ice crystals inside the berry's cells, and those crystals physically rupture the plant tissue as they form. That rupture, destructive as it sounds, actually makes the anthocyanins more accessible, more extractable than they were in the intact fresh fruit. Meanwhile, fresh berries sitting in the refrigerator are doing the opposite. They're still alive, biologically speaking, and still respiring, slowly breaking down their own antioxidant content the longer they sit uneaten in the crisper drawer. A separate study tracking anthocyanin levels found meaningful losses in fresh berries within just 2 weeks of storage, while frozen berries held steady over the same stretch. None of this makes fresh berries a bad choice when you're actually eating them quickly, but it does mean the entire fresh is automatically superior. Instinct doesn't survive contact with how berries specifically behave once picked. A bag from the freezer aisle, tossed straight into a smoothie or a bowl of oatmeal with zero prep, isn't the fallback option. In a real, measurable sense, it might be the better one. Number 5, avocados. Avocados occupy a strange position in nutrition conversations. They're simultaneously praised as a health food and treated with a little suspicion, mostly because of one word that scares people who've been trained to fear it: fat. The fear isn't irrational, exactly. It's just outdated. Avocados are dominated by monounsaturated fat, the same category found in olive oil, and decades of research have drawn a fairly clear line between that specific type of fat and improved cardiovascular markers, rather than the harm associated with other fat sources. A single avocado also delivers a genuinely useful amount of potassium, in the same territory as a banana, often more depending on size, which matters given how many people fall short of it. Here's what makes avocados specifically convenient rather than just nutritious. Nothing about preparing one requires a stove, a pan, or a plan. Cut it open, remove the pit, and you're already at the finish line. whether that means mashing it onto toast, slicing it into a salad, or eating it straight out of the skin with a spoon, which, if you've never tried it, is genuinely the fastest route from refrigerator to meal that exists for a food this nutrient dense. There's a mechanism worth mentioning here too, one that connects avocados back to lentils. Dietary fat, including the kind in avocados, helps the body absorb certain fat-soluble nutrients, vitamins A, D, E, and K, more efficiently when they're eaten in the same meal. A salad with leafy greens and a sliced avocado isn't just two healthy foods sitting next to each other. The avocado is actively helping the body extract more value from the greens beside it. So the case for avocados isn't really about any single standout nutrient. It's that they combine genuine cardiovascular research, real convenience, and a quiet multiplier effect on whatever they're eaten alongside, all from a food you open with your hands. Number 6. Spinach and greens. Leafy greens have a genuine reputation problem, and it's not really about nutrition. It's about labor. Buying a bunch of fresh spinach, washing off the grit, picking through wilted leaves, that friction alone is probably responsible for more abandoned healthy eating attempts than any actual dislike of the vegetable itself. The fix has existed for years, quietly, in the pre-washed bagged greens sitting in nearly every grocery store's produce section. And the nutrition case for spinach doesn't weaken just because it's arriving pre-cleaned. A cup of cooked spinach delivers a genuinely dense package of iron, magnesium, and vitamin K, alongside dietary nitrate, a compound the body converts into nitric oxide, which helps blood vessels relax and widen. That mechanism has been studied specifically for its role in supporting healthy blood pressure. Here's a detail that matters more than most people realize. Raw spinach in a salad and cooked spinach wilted into a dish aren't delivering quite the same experience, volume-wise. Spinach loses an enormous amount of bulk when heated, which means the seemingly small handful you wilt into a hot pan for 30 seconds actually represents far more of the vegetable and its nutrients than the same size portion sitting raw in a bowl. That's also exactly why spinach earns its spot on a list about ease rather than effort. It doesn't need to be the centerpiece of anything. Wilt a handful into eggs, into a simmering soup, into pasta at the last minute, and it disappears into whatever's already cooking without changing the dish or asking for extra attention. Nobody's building their morning around a kale salad. Most people who eat spinach regularly are doing something closer to smuggling it in. That's not a lesser strategy. For a food this nutritionally dense, quietly folding it into meals you're already making might be the only approach that actually survives contact with a normal week. Number 7. Nuts and seeds. There's a specific kind of health advice that sounds simple until you actually try to follow it. Eat more healthy fats, and then leaves you standing in a grocery aisle with no clear idea what that means in practice. Nuts and seeds solve that problem about as directly as food can, mostly because there's genuinely nothing to prepare. A handful of almonds, walnuts, or pumpkin seeds delivers a combination most single foods don't manage: protein, fiber, and unsaturated fat at once, with zero cooking, zero prep, and a shelf life measured in months rather than days. Walnuts specifically stand out within that group. They're the richest common source of plant-based omega-3 fatty acid, a compound the body can only partially convert into the more active omega-3 forms typically associated with fish. And here's where the story gets more precise than nuts are healthy. Research has repeatedly found that despite being calorie dense, regular nut consumption doesn't reliably translate into weight gain the way you'd expect from the raw calorie math. Part of the explanation seems to be structural. The fat inside a nut is partially locked within its cell walls, and the digestive system doesn't break down and absorb all of it as efficiently as the calorie count on the label would suggest. You're eating the calories. Your body isn't necessarily extracting every one of them. That's a genuinely interesting wrinkle, and also a reminder not to overcorrect in the other direction. Nuts are still calorie dense and portion still matters. A small handful is doing real nutritional work. A large bag eaten absent-mindedly in front of a screen is a different conversation entirely. What makes nuts and seeds belong on this list specifically is how little friction stands between you and eating them well. No washing, no cooking, no plan. Just a jar within reach, which turns out to be most of what consistency actually requires. Number 8. Canned fish. Fresh salmon has a reputation as the responsible adult's protein choice. Canned tuna has a reputation as something you eat over the sink when there's nothing else in the house. That gap in perception is bigger than the gap in nutrition actually justifies. A can of tuna or salmon delivers a genuinely serious amount of lean protein, roughly 20 to 25 grams per typical serving, along with omega 3 fatty acids, the same EPA and DHA compounds researchers have studied extensively for their role in cardiovascular and brain health. And unlike fresh fish, none of it requires a knife, a pan, or knowing what properly cooked is supposed to look like. Open the can, drain it, eat it. Here's the detail that actually flips the usual assumption. Canned salmon, in particular, is often packed with the bones still inside, softened enough through the canning process that they're barely noticeable and completely edible. Those bones are a genuinely significant source of calcium, the kind most people are trying to get from dairy or supplements, without realizing a can in their pantry is already quietly supplying it. There's a real caveat worth including here, and it's not a minor one. Some fish, larger species higher up the food chain in particular, can accumulate mercury over their lifespan. Canned light tuna, made primarily from smaller species, tends to carry meaningfully less mercury than canned white or albacore tuna, which comes from a larger fish. Health guidance generally recommends moderating albacore intake more carefully than light tuna, particularly for pregnant women and young children. A distinction that's easy to miss if you're just grabbing whatever canned fran is cheapest that week. None of that erases the convenience case. It just means the honest version of canned fish is easy comes with a footnote worth reading once, not a label worth ignoring every time you're standing in the canned goods aisle. Number 9. Nut butters. If nuts and seeds solve the no prep problem, nut butters solve a slightly different one: portability. And the difference between those two things matters more than it sounds like it should. A jar of peanut or almond butter delivers roughly the same nutritional profile as the whole nut it came from: protein, unsaturated fat, and a meaningful amount of fiber, just in a form that spreads onto anything, mixes into anything, and travels without spilling. A spoonful stirred into oatmeal, spread across a banana, or eaten directly off a spoon during a genuinely busy morning covers a real gap that whole nuts, for all their convenience, still can't quite close. You can't really spread almonds onto toast. Here's where it's worth being precise, rather than treating every jar as interchangeable. Grinding nuts into butter doesn't meaningfully strip away the core nutrition. Protein and healthy fat largely survive the process intact. What does change significantly, depending on the specific product, is what gets added afterward. Some brands add sugar, palm oil, or hydrogenated fats to improve shelf stability and texture, ingredients that dilute the nutritional profile without changing what the label proudly calls itself. A jar listing only peanuts and maybe salt is doing genuinely different nutritional work than one with a 5-line ingredient list. That's not a reason to avoid nut butters. It's a reason to actually read the one line on the label that matters and treat natural or no added sugar claims with the same skepticism you'd apply to any other marketing language on packaging, since neither phrase is strictly regulated the way you might assume. Once you've found a version that's just the nut, ground down, nut butter earns its place here, honestly. It's one of the only foods on this entire list that requires literally no decision beyond opening the jar and manages to stay genuinely nutritious the whole way through. Number 10, canned tomatoes. Save the most counterintuitive one for last, because it directly contradicts an instinct almost everyone has about processed food, without exception. Canned tomatoes aren't just a convenient stand-in for fresh ones. In one specific, well-documented way, they're nutritionally better. The compound in question is lycopene, the pigment responsible for a tomato's deep red color, and one researchers have studied extensively for its antioxidant properties and its association with cardiovascular health. Here's the detail that upends the usual fresh is best assumption. Lycopene is more bioavailable, meaning the body can actually absorb and use more of it after the tomato has been heated and its cell walls broken down. A raw tomato locks a meaningful portion of its lycopene inside a structure the digestive system can't fully access. Canning does exactly that, heating and breaking down as a basic step in the process before the can is ever sealed, which means a can of crushed tomatoes sitting in your pantry isn't a diminished version of a fresh tomato. For this specific compound, it's closer to a more usable one, requiring no stove time, no chopping, and no decision about whether tonight's the night you'll actually cook with the fresh ones before they go soft on the counter. There's a practical caveat worth naming plainly. Some canned tomato products carry meaningful added sodium, and it's genuinely worth checking the label for a no salt added version if you're watching intake closely. That's a real limitation, not a footnote to dismiss. But it's also a solvable one, unlike the lycopene-pene bioavailability question, which isn't a matter of finding a better product. It's just how the chemistry works. So canned tomatoes close out this list the same way the whole video opened. Not by asking you to do more, but by pointing out that something you'd normally categorize as a shortcut was, in this one specific case, quietly doing more nutritional work than the version everyone assumes is superior. 10 foods, and not one of them asked you to plan ahead, chop anything elaborate, or follow a recipe. A few of them: canned tomatoes, frozen berries, even Greek yogurt with the right label turned out to be better specifically because of the processing most of us are trained to distrust. So maybe the real question isn't which of these foods is healthiest, it's why we ever assumed easy had to mean worse. Which one on this list surprised you most?